Hi everyone, it's Miss Carla from the Local Library. This is another video of Classics with Carla. Today we're going to read Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. I downloaded this from Project Gutenberg, which is a website that has all sorts of different books that are in the public domain, which means they don't have a copyright, which means you can download them for free and legally. So do check out that website. I'll put it in the description below so you guys can go ahead and check it out. Today we're going to read only one chapter of Anne of Green Gables. So it's going to be chapter 1, Miss Rachel Lynde's Surprise. All right. So this is on my Kindle, so I do apologize for any glare, but Miss Rachel Lynde lived just where the Avonlea main road dipped down into a little hollow, fringed with antlers and ladies' eardrops, and traversed by a brook that had its source away back in the woods of the old Cuthbert place. It was reputed to be an intricate, headlong brook in its earlier course through those woods, with dark secrets of pool and cascade. But by the time it reached Lynde's Hollow, it was a quiet, well-conducted little stream, for not even a brook could run past Miss Rachel Lynde's door without due regard for decency and decorum. It probably was conscious that Miss Rachel was sitting at her window, keeping a sharp eye on everything that passed. There are plenty of people in Avonlea and out of it who can attend closely to their neighbor's business by a dint of neglecting their own, but Miss Rachel Lynde was one of those capable creatures who can manage her own concerns and those of other folks into the bargain. She was a notable housewife. Her work was always done and well done, and she ran the sewing circle, helped run the Sunday school, and was the strongest prop of the Church Aid Society and Foreign Missions Auxiliary. Yet with all this, Miss Rachel found abundant time to sit for hours at her kitchen window, knitting quilts, and she had knitting 16 of them, as Avonlea housekeepers were excited to tell in odd voices, and keeping a sharp eye on the main road that crossed the hollow and wound up the steep red hill beyond. Since Avonlea occupied a little triangular peninsula jutting out into the Gulf of St. Lawrence with water on two sides of it, anybody who went out of it or into it had to pass over that hill road and to run the unseen gauntlet of Miss Rachel's all-seeing eye. She was sitting there one afternoon in early July, and the sun was coming in at the window warm and bright, and the orchard on the slope below the house was in a bridal flush of pinky white bloom, hummed over by a myriad of bees. Thomas Lynde, a meek little man whom Avonlea people called Rachel Lynde's husband, was sowing his late turnip seed on the hill field beyond the barn, and Matthew Cuthbert ought to have been sowing his own on the big red brook field away over by Green Gables. Miss Rachel knew that he ought because he had heard him tell Peter Morrison the evening before in William J. Blair's store over at Carmarty that he meant to sow his turnip seed the next afternoon. Peter had asked him, of course, for Matthew Cuthbert and had never been known to volunteer information about anything in his whole life. Yet here was Matthew Cuthbert at 3:30 on the afternoon of a busy day, placidly driving over the hollow and up the hill. Moreover, he wore a white collar and his best suit of clothes, which was plain proof that he was going out of Avonlea, and he had the buggy and the mare, which beckoned that he was going a considerable distance. Now, where was the Matthew Cuthbert going, and why was he going there? Had it been any other man in Avonlea, Miss Rachel deftly put this together and might have given a good guess as to both questions. But Matthew so rarely went from home that it must be something pressing and unusual which has taken him. He was the shyest man alive and hated to be among strangers or to any place where he might have to talk. Miss Rachel pondered as she might, but could make nothing of it, and her afternoon's enjoyment was spoiled. I'll just step over to Green Gables after tea and find out from Marilla where he's gone and why, the worthy woman finally concluded. Accordingly, after tea, Miss Rachel set out. She had not far to go. The big rambling orchard and bowered house where the Cuthberts lived was a scant quarter of a mile up the road from Lynde's Hollow. To be sure, the long lane made it a good deal further. Matthew Cuthbert's father, as shy and silent as his son after him, had got as far away as he possibly could from his fellow men without actually retreating into the woods when he founded his homestead. Green Gables was built at the furthest edge of his cleared land, and there it was to this day, barely visible from the main road along which all the other Avonlea houses were so sociably situated. Miss Rachel Lynde did not call living in such a place living at all. That's just staying, that's what it is, she said, as she stepped along the deep-rutted grassy lane bordered with wild red rose bushes. It's no wonder Matthew and Marilla are both a little odd, living away back there by themselves. Trees aren't much company. They sure seem to be contented enough, but then I suppose they're used to it. A body can get used to anything, even to being hanged, as the Irishman once said. With this, Miss Rachel stepped out of the lane into the backyard of Green Gables. There was not a stray stick or stone that was to be seen, for Miss Rachel would have seen it if there had been. Privately, she was of the opinion that Marilla Cuthbert swept that yard over as often as she swept her house, and one could have even eaten a meal off the ground. Miss Rachel rapped smartly at the kitchen door and stepped in when bidden to do so. The kitchen at Green Gables was a cheerful apartment, or it would have been cheerful if it had not been so painfully clean as to give it something of the appearance of an unused parlor. Here sat Marilla Cuthbert, when she sat at all, always slightly distrustful of the sunshine, which seemed to her too dancing irresponsible a thing for a world which was meant to be taken seriously. And here she sat now, knitting, and the table behind her was laid for supper. Miss Rachel, before she could fairly close the door, had taken a mental note of everything that was on the table. There were 3 plates laid, so that Marilla must be expecting someone home with Matthew to tea. But the dishes were everyday dishes, and there was only crab apple preserves and one kind of cake, so that the expected company could not be any particular company. Yet, what of Matthew's white collar and the mare? Miss Rachel was getting fairly dizzy with this unusual mystery about quiet, unmysterious Green Gables. Good evening, Rachel, Marilla said briskly. This is a real fine evening, isn't it? Won't you sit down, and how are all of your folks? Something that, for the lack of any other name, might be called friendship existed and always had existed between Marilla Cuthbert and Miss Rachel, in spite of, or perhaps because of, their dissimilarity. Marilla was a tall, thin woman with angles and without curves, and her dark hair showed some gray streaks and was always twisted up in a hard little knot behind 2 wire hairpins struck aggressively through it. She looked like a woman of narrow experience and rigid conscience, which she was. But there was a saving something about her mouth which, if it had been ever so slightly developed, might have been considered indicative of a sense of humor. We're all pretty well, said Miss Rachel. I was kind of afraid you weren't, though, when I saw Matthew starting off today. I thought maybe he was going to the doctor's. Marilla's lips twitched understandingly. She had expected Miss Rachel up. Had she known that the sight of Matthew jaunting off so unaccountably would be too much for her neighbor's curiosity. Oh, no, I'm quite well, although I had a bad headache yesterday, she said. Matthew went to Bright River. We're getting a little boy from an orphan asylum in Nova Scotia, and he is coming on the train today. If Marilla had said that Matthew had gone to Bright River to meet a kangaroo from Australia, Miss Rachel could not have been more astonished. She was dumb-stricken for 5 seconds. It was unsupposable that Marilla was making fun of her, but Miss Rachel was almost forced to suppose it. Are you in earnest, Marilla? She demanded when voice returned to her. Of course, said Marilla, as if getting boys from orphan asylums in Nova Scotia were part of the usual spring work on any well-regulated Avonlea farm instead of being an unheard of innovation. Miss Rachel felt that she had received a severe mental jolt. She thought in exclamation points. A boy? Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, of all people, adopting a boy from an orphan asylum? Well, the world was certainly turning upside down. She would be surprised at nothing after this. Nothing! What on earth put such a notion into your head? She demanded disapprovingly. This had have been done without her advice being asked, and she must perforce be disapproved. Well, we've been thinking about it for some time, all winter, in fact, returned Marilla. Miss Alexander Spencer was up here one day before Christmas, and she said she was going to get a little girl from the asylum over in Hopeton in the spring. Her cousin lives there, and Miss Spencer has visited here and knows all about it. So, Matthew and I have talked it over off and on ever since. We thought we would get a boy. Matthew is getting up in years, he's 60 and he isn't so spry as he once was. His heart troubles him a good deal. And you know how desperate hard it's going to get hired help. There's never anybody to be had but those stupid half-grown little French boys. And as soon as you do get one broken to your ways and taught something, he's up and off to the lobster canneries or the States. At first, Matthew suggested getting a homeboy, but I said no, flat to that. They may be all right, I'm not saying they're not, but no London streets kids for me, I said. Give me a native born at least. There'll be a risk no matter who we get, but I'll feel easier in my mind and sleep sounder at nights if we get a born Canadian. So in the end, we decided to ask Miss Spencer to pick us out one when she went over to get her little girl. And we heard last week she was going, so we sent her word by Richard Spencer's folks in Carmody to bring us a smart, likely boy of about 10 or 11. We decided that would be the best age. Old enough to be of some use in doing chores right off and young enough to be trained up proper. We mean to give him a good home and schooling. We had a telegram from Miss Alexander Spencer today. The mailman brought it in from the station, saying that they were coming on the 5:30 train tonight. So Matthew went to the Bright River to meet him, and Miss Spencer will drop him off here. Of course, she goes on to White Sand Station herself. Miss Rachel prided herself on always speaking her mind, and she proceeded to speak it now, having adjusted her mental attitude to this amazing piece of news. Well, Marilla, I'll just tell you plain that I think you're doing a mighty foolish thing, a risky thing, that's what. You don't know what you're getting. You're bringing a strange child into your house and home. You don't know a single thing about him, nor what his disposition is like, nor what sort of parents he had, nor how he's likely to turn out. Why, it was only last week I read in the paper how a man and his wife up west of the island took a boy out of an orphan asylum, and he set fire to the house at night. Set it on purpose, Marilla, and nearly burnt them to a crisp in their beds. And I know another case where an adopted boy used to suck the eggs. They couldn't break him of it. If you had asked my advice in the matter, which you didn't do, Marilla, I'd have said for mercy's sake not to think of such a thing. That's what. This did not offend nor alarm Marilla. She knitted steadily on. I don't deny there's something in what you say, Rachel. I've had some qualms myself, but Matthew was terrible set on it. I could see that, so I gave in. It's so seldom Matthew sets his mind on anything that when he does, I always feel it's my duty to give in. And as for the risk, there's risks in pretty near everything a body does in this world. There's risks in people having children of their own. If it comes to that, they don't always turn out well. And then, Nova Scotia is right close to the island. It isn't as if we're getting him from England or the States. He can't be much different from ourselves. Well, I hope it turns out all right, said Miss Rachel in a tone that plainly indicated her painful doubts. Only don't say I didn't warn you if he burns Green Gables down or puts something in the well. I've heard of a case over in New Brunswick where an orphan asylum child did that and the whole family died in fearful agonies. Only it was a girl in that instance. Well, we're not getting a girl, said Marilla, as the poisoning wells were a purely feminine accomplishment and not to be dreaded in the case of a boy. I never dream of taking a girl to bring up. I wonder at Miss Alexander Spencer for doing it, but there, she wouldn't shrink from adopting a whole orphan asylum if she took it into her head. Miss Rachel would have liked to stay until Matthew came home with his imported orphan, but reflecting that it would be a good 2 hours at least before his arrival, she concluded to go up the road to Robert Bell's and tell the news. It would certainly make a sensation second to none, and Miss Rachel dearly loved to make a sensation. So she took herself away, somewhat to Marilla's relief, for the latter felt her doubts and fears reviving under the influence of Miss Rachel's pessimism. Well, of all the things that ever were will be, said Miss Rachel when she was safely out in the lane, it does really seem as if I must be dreaming. Well, I'm sorry for that poor young one, and no mistake. Matthew and Marilla don't know anything about children, and they'll expect him to be wiser and steadier than his own grandfather. If so, B's he'd ever had a grandfather, which is doubtful. It seems uncanny to think of a child at Green Gables somehow. There never have been one, for Matthew and Marilla were grown up when the new house was built. If they ever were children, which is hard to believe when one looks at them. I wouldn't be in that orphan's shoes for anything, but I pity him, that's what. So said Miss Rachel to the wild rose bushes out of the fullness of her heart, but if she could have seen the child who was waiting patiently at the bright river station at the very moment, her pity would have been still deeper and more profound. And that's the end of chapter 1. So I appreciate you guys listening. Looks like they're getting a child, they're getting an orphan, so hopefully everything turns out, but we shall see. Alright guys, I will talk to you later. Bye.